Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. My name is Angelia, and today I'm doing the Think Twice book tag. This tag was originally created by Jolene at Bookworm Adventure Girl and AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, and I will include a link to their channels and those videos in the notes. But I was tagged by Shawn at Shawn the Book Maniac, and it was very fortuitous because over the weekend I was trying to think about what I wanted to film this week, and I had looked at a couple of tags, and I was looking at a pile of books that I need to unhaul. I'm thinking I might do an unhaul video, but I wasn't feeling especially inspired. And then lo and behold, my name appeared in a list of people that he had tagged when he did this video. I'm going to include his video also, and you really should watch this one because it is very entertaining and funny, as Shawn always is. And I really like this tag. It has a lot of, even when I was watching it, I was thinking about how I might answer these questions while enjoying his answers. So I'll include all these. You can watch all these different interpretations of the tag from all of these YouTubers. Okay, but let us move on to the actual prompts. The first one is Double Vision, and I got them over here, so that's what I'm looking at. Double Vision, a book that features twins. All right, so a few months ago, I did read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, and this, of course, is about Will Shakespeare's, the death of his son Hamnet, which may have inspired the writing of the play Hamlet. It's really more about his wife and what an amazing woman that she was, and the process of grief throughout the family after the death of Hamnet from the plague. But Hamnet was a twin. He had a twin sister, Judith, and at the beginning of this story, Judith is actually the one who falls ill while they are playing, and Hamnet's running all over town trying to find his mother and his sister to help Judith. Judith becomes gravely ill, and they write to Will Shakespeare in London to notify him that he better come home because his daughter is probably dying. But when he finally gets there, it turns out that she's actually recovered, and it's Hamnet who has caught the plague from Judith, and he has actually passed away. So I'm not really giving out a spoiler. That's what the book is about. It's about that Hamnet dies and how the family processes this terrible grief that ensues. It's also about the relationship between Will, who's not actually named in the book, and his wife Agnes, and the remarkable woman that she was. So anyway, but there is a twin relationship here. We find out later about the circumstances of their birth and how Judith was always sort of fragile and, was prone to illnesses. She was the weaker twin, and so they were very worried about her whenever she became ill. And she, of course, had a very close bond with her brother. And then later on, we find out how she deals with his loss in the aftermath of his death. So that was one choice. I also was thinking about the book The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett because I am discussing it this week in my T group book club. It's called Plum Deluxe Book Clubbers. And I read it a few years ago. And that is a book about twins are always two twin sisters who are light-skinned Black women. And as teenagers, they run away, and they're together for a while, but then they split up. One woman marries a Black man, has a child, but she leaves her husband because he's abusive, and she comes back to their hometown and raises her daughter. And then the other sister gets a job passing for white and marries a wealthy white man who doesn't know about her past. And then later on in the future, when the daughter of the other woman grows up and goes off to college, circumstances occur that kind of reconnect some of these people. So that was the other book that came to mind when I thought about twins. Now, I'm going to confess, though, that when I read the question, the very first book, these books are the books of literary quality that I chose to highlight, but they weren't the first book that popped into my mind when I heard this prompt. And I'm going to sadly confess that the very first book I thought of was none other than Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews, one of the trashiest books of all time that has shaped legions of people who read this in 8th grade while their parents thought that they were reading a book about kids that lived in a haunted house. It's just terrible. But, you know, it just popped back into my mind when I heard twins. I thought of Kathy and Chris. So, whew, get rid of them. I don't want to think about them anymore. All right, the next one is Double Talk, a book with two or twice in the title. Well, just very recently, I read Two Nights in Lisbon by Chris Pavone. We sort of decided his name is Pavone, but it might be Pavone. But this was a thriller that my husband and I both read and enjoyed about a woman who accompanies her husband of just a few months on his business trip to Portugal. And after the first night, she wakes up and he's gone. And she can't find him. And she contacts the police and the embassy to report him missing. And then she subsequently receives a ransom note. So on the surface, it is a kidnapping story, but there's so much more. And it is a very fun thriller that I recommend if you like page turners. Seeing Double, a book where the reflection, shadow, or mirror images on the cover. All right, again from the archives of things that have scarred us for life is this book, Mirror, by Alexandra Day and Christina Darling. Darling wrote the text, Day did the illustrations. She's more famously known for the Carl books that are wordless about the Rottweiler black dog that does various mischief around his family and around the town. But this book is about a little girl whose family, a friend, I think, or a relative or something, is in the process of moving, and she leaves some stuff with them for a while, and there's this big mirror, and they hang the mirror up in the little girl's room so it'll be safe hanging on the wall. But the mirror is magic and it reflects all kinds of weird things. And it's supposed to be fanciful and imaginative, but instead it's just like weird and creepy. And a lot of it's because of these really strange illustrations. This was my daughter's book. I can't remember if we bought it at the bookstore or like at a library, secondhand sale or something. But we just laugh about this book to this day of how bizarre and creepy it was, but we liked it anyway. And I don't know if I can find a good example of this, but she first finds out that she realizes there's things in the mirror when she's not looking, and then she can't quite catch them, but then it starts letting her see the images. So this one over here is the one that just really creeped us out. What in the world? It says, I tried showing it a book that always makes me laugh. And so that's supposed to be the mirror reflecting her laughing, but it's just so disturbing. It's supposed to be cute and imaginative, but it's just sinister and weird. And so anyway, the next prompt is Take Two. Two book covers that look similar, but they are by different authors. I'm going to change this answer because I don't really have a good answer to that question, but I do have a story about a time when there was two books with the same title and I got confused. So here's my story. A friend of mine who knows that I like to read mysteries and thrillers recommended a book that she had read, and she told me the title. The title was The Girl Before. Maybe you've read it. And so I jotted down the title, and she said it's about this woman who moves into this weird house that has all of these super modern features, but it turns out to be bizarre and it's spying on her and it's creepy. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. So I went to the library, I looked it up, and I checked out The Girl Before. I started reading it, and at the beginning of the book I was reading, there's this woman and she's at home with her daughters, and then the FBI or the police barge in and they arrest her husband and grab her kids, and on the way out her husband says, "Don't say anything." And then she's taken in and she starts to be being questioned about her background and her upbringing. And as she starts to tell her story, you realize it's a story about human trafficking. And I read this for a good ways into the book, wondering where the ultra modern house was coming into the story. And it never came into the story because I was reading The Girl Before by Rita Olson, and my friend was talking about The Girl Before by J.P. Dunleavy. And so it was a totally different book. So I read the rest of the book I was reading, and then eventually I did read the other book. And you know what? I didn't even really like it. It was too gone girly and it wasn't exactly my taste. So I gave it a try, but I actually liked the other book better. So it was a tale of two titles, and that's it. I mean, there's no moral to this story. The next prompt is, I second that, a retelling. So the book that I am offering for that prompt is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nevo. I've talked about this book before. It was in my top 24 last year. And this is for fans of The Great Gatsby who also are open to some magic realism. So in this novel, we carry over the time period and basic setting of The Great Gatsby. So we have New York in the 1920s. We have all of the beautiful people and the parties, but the story is being told from the point of view of Jordan Baker, who in The Great Gatsby is a young woman that Nick dates during that summer. And in this book, she also does date Nick during that summer, but she is an adopted Asian American woman who was adopted into a wealthy family, kind of like almost like a token or a charity adoption, like we're going to help out this young needy girl. And as she has grown up, she is feeling less and less a part of her social community. She's also queer, but a lot of people in the story are queer. So basically, and she has a magical talent of sorts. So what we have is a queer fantasy retelling of The Great Gatsby from a different perspective, an outsider perspective, someone who feels alienated from the group. And it's a different way to look at the events of The Great Gatsby. So I enjoyed that one, and it was a retelling. Okay, next we have Two Can Play at That Game, a character who plays two roles or an alter ego. And for that one, I have a book that I read maybe back in December called Brat Farrar by Josephine Tay. This book was written in, 1950. She died in 1952. And this is a classic mid-century mystery writer, and I had not read any of her books, but I was visiting at my mother's house, and she has a lot of those classic mystery writers, so I borrowed this book, and I really enjoyed it. In this story, Brat Farrar is a young man who is passing through an English town when he is spotted by someone who is a kind of family friend of a family in town. He's a little sketchy as far as friends go, but he is an artist. He's a gambler. He's kind of a con dude, but he's sort of, one of those tertiary friends in this family. And he is kind of flabbergasted when he sees Brat, because Brat is the spitting image of a guy in that family. And that particular guy died when he was 13. He looks like the brother as well, but their parents died in a car accident. And then one of the brothers committed suicide when he was 13. He jumped off a cliff. And the other brother, that's either close in age or a twin, and I forget, but anyway, he is going to inherit this big fortune. He's about to come of age and turn 21 and inherit all this money. Yeah, he's the oldest one. And then but the guy who died would have been the oldest one. And then there's a sister that's an adult right under them, and then these two younger girls. The sketchy friend is just like, you look exactly like this guy. And he proposes this con that you go in there and say that you are the dead brother, that you didn't really die. You staged your death and ran away because whatever, you were miserable. And now you've come back and it's time for the fortune. So Brat's just like, I don't know. This sounds, this sounds like a load. I don't think I want to do this. But then when the guy tells him that they have horse farms and that they raise horses for competition, Brat gets really interested because that's what he does. He loves horses and he likes to compete horses and train them. And so he wants, basically, he does this whole thing because he wants to see the horses. And so he does come into the family. The guy kind of schools him and gives him a whole lot of information about the house and the family and the background so that he can pass himself off as this guy. I think his name is Patrick. And he comes in and impersonates Patrick. And so the book is about whether or not that is successful. Do people believe him? What actually happened when Patrick died, and a whole bunch of stuff. So it was really fun, and it is about somebody with a fake identity. So the character who plays two roles. It Takes Two, a duology. So for this answer, I'm going to put up a picture of a duology that I would like to read, but I haven't read it yet, and that is Vicious and Vengeance by V.E. Schwab. All three of us read the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy. I think that might have been part of our pandemic reading back in 2020. And then my daughter and I both really loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So I really like this author. I haven't read these two books that are a fantasy duology. We did give Emma Grace these books as a gift for Christmas. Not this Christmas we just had, but I guess the year before. We gave her these and she said they were good. So I'm going to borrow them from her at some point. That's what came to mind when I thought of a duology. Number 8. On the Double, A Tale Told in Two Timelines. Well, I have two books to offer for this, both of which I have talked about in different videos, but one of them is Kindred. And you know what was hard about this prompt was I kept thinking of books that had more than two timelines. Like, I really love books with multiple narrators and multiple timelines, and but a lot of them have like more than two. There's 3 or 4 going on. And then also I thought, well, wait a minute. Are we talking about, there's difference between two timelines and just like backstories, like where it kind of stops and then it goes and does a piece from something that happened before, or the person kind of reveals things bit by bit. But is that really two timelines, or does there have to be like a whole separate story and then somehow they converge? So I'm not sure what the original intention was, but here's what I got. Kindred by Octavia Butler. There are two timelines for sure here. We have a woman named Dana who lives in the present, although the present in this book is the 1970s because that's when Butler wrote it. And in the present, she is a Black woman who has a white husband, and they've just moved into their first house that they've bought. And when they're unpacking in their house, all of a sudden she starts to feel really weird. And then all of a sudden she's on the banks of a river and there's a little boy drowning in the river. And she, without thinking, she saves him, resuscitates him. And then she realizes that everybody is kind of freaked out and horrified at her presence. And but before she can really process where or what's going on, she's back in her current timeline again. But what she discovers is happening is that she is going back in time to the 1800s, the early 1800s, and there's a little boy. Every time he is in some sort of trouble or danger, she is transporting back in time and having to save him. And she finds out that this family, which is a family of plantation owners and slave owners, has a connection to her own heredity. every time she goes back, it's at a little further along in his life. Though in her time, it's only maybe a day or two later. So those are the two timelines. It is a great story. I have heard, sadly, that the recent Hulu production of this book was not so good. And in fact, they didn't cover the whole novel because they did it as a series and they were going to do more than one season, but they did not get renewed. So I'm not even going to watch it because it's like half of a story, but I heard that it I don't know what's wrong with it, but I heard it was not very successfully rendered or whatever. So, but that's Kindred. A Perfect Pair. The last two books you gave 5 stars to. Well, I think 5 stars is kind of a Goodreads thing, and I don't do Goodreads, but here's what I do. I have a journal, just a pen and paper handwritten journal, and books that particularly strike me in whatever way, I give a star to. So everything is either starred, it's like everything from not good at all up to pretty good gets nothing, and then if it really hit me, then it gets a star. So the last two books that I gave my 1 star to were Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which I just read a couple of weeks ago. I talk about it quite at length in a previous video, so I won't carry on, but it is apparently also somewhat of a retelling of David Copperfield, but I haven't read David Copperfield, but it is a story of a boy named Demon Copperhead growing up in Appalachia in the foster care system and dealing with issues of addiction. So it's really good. It's pretty long, but it moved pretty fast for me. And also, what was the other one? Oh, How High We Go in the Dark was another recent one from since this year began. I guess this was in January, maybe. And this is a series of connected short stories. It is speculative fiction. Well, it's presented as a novel. The stories comprise a novel. In this book, a virus is unleashed from the Arctic when a young girl who was frozen in the ice from thousands of years ago is thought out for study, and they accidentally release this ancient virus, and it becomes what's called the Arctic plague, and it kills millions and millions and millions of people. And so each subsequent story is different aspects really of loss and grief in the framework of this pandemic and its aftermath. And that sounds really, really bleak, but it's really not that bleak, and it is a really solid speculative fiction, science fiction novel, and I love it, and I hope you read it. All right, then we have Two for the Show, a book that has been adapted to film 2 or more times. Well, how about Pride and Prejudice, which has also been adapted into my bookcase about 3 times, but here's a couple of them. This book has been made into a film many, many times, but it really doesn't matter because the only one you need is the one from 1995 with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ayla. And I know that there are people that are strongly team 2005 with Keira Knightley, and no comment. Then we have Two's Company, a book with 2 or more authors or a translated work of fiction. All right, my pile has gotten scrambled, but I really enjoyed a number of years ago the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Schaefer and Annie Barrows. This is an aunt and niece duo. Marianne Schaefer became gravely ill and then died during the course of writing this book. And when she was ill, she asked her niece, Annie Barrows, if she would step in and complete the novel, which she did. And Annie Barrows, I'm more familiar with her as a children's author, especially the Ivy and Bean series, which was a terrific hit in my household when my daughter was young. But she has written a couple of adult books as well. But this one is a book of, it's epistolary too. So it's a book about in the aftermath of World War II, A writer named Juliet is looking for an idea for a book, and she embarks on a correspondence with a man that lives on this little island. He writes to her looking for some books by a certain author. She ends up traveling there. Things happen. There's wartime trauma and secrets. There's romance and different stuff. But it is quite a pleasing story in the epistolary style, which I enjoyed. And I saw the movie more recently, and that was pretty good as well. Then a translated one that's on my TBR that I'm excited about is Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro and translated by Frances Riddle. This book takes place in Buenos Aires, and it is about a woman who is suffering from Parkinson's disease, and she's trying to gather some information about the death of her daughter that she does not believe was suicide, and she has to traverse the city in little increments while her medication is working and she can get her body to cooperate. I've heard that it's excellent and really moving, and I'm looking forward to reading it. All right, there's one more question, and it is double take. Recommend 2 books that you think would pair well together and why. So I have kind of a double pairing. I have a book that I thought of that I wanted to pair, and then I thought of 2 different possible pairings. The main book is The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. I really love this book. This was one of my favorite books from, I guess, 2021. Is that? Yeah, 2021. Top 3 for sure. I really love The Lincoln Highway. I really love all of his books, but I thought this was his best one so far. And if you haven't read The Lincoln Highway, it takes place in 1954, and it is about a young boy who has had to serve some time in a detention home, and he's turned 18, he gets out, he goes home, and his plan is to pick up his younger brother, and they're going to go out to California to look for their mom. But instead, some friends of his who have busted out of that same facility show up on his doorstep, and a road adventure ensues. Not to his choice, but that's what happens. And so it's about this group of teenage boys and one younger boy, and the various things that occur. It's really good. Some of it's funny, some of it's really deeply sad. The characters are really memorable, and I love this story. So I thought of 2 ways to pair it. To go backwards to a more a classic kind of bedrock that might have informed some of this story would be to look at The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. In this instance, you have 2 books that are both about kind of American journeys and escapades, young boys striking out on their own, various conflicts with other people and within themselves, coming of age, deciding for yourself what is important and what is right. Those kind of things all come into play. And both of the books have an important character who comes into the storyline who is an adult Black man who's having a very different experience in America than the kids. And what that man has to say to them and what he has to offer them in terms of life lessons and questions that they need to consider about how to conduct themselves, what is valuable and important, and things like that. So in one story we have Ulysses, and the other story, of course, Jim, and they both serve as very important catalysts in the story. Another way that you could go, though, is if you consider a pairing of The Lincoln Highway with another book that came out kind of at a similar time, would be The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. The events of that story take place in the early 60s, I believe. And then that story has a 2 timelines thing, because there's a current day part of the story where the narrator is remembering what happened to him back when he was a kid. So that I could have used that for 2 timelines. But both of those stories generate from a reform school, but the schools are very, very different. So the story of these young men in mid-century who are white versus the young men in the very near time period who are black, and the tone of these books, the scenes at the schools and what happens to them is vastly different, but two American stories. That is the final question. I think if you are a newer booktuber within the past year or so, there's a good chance that you have not done this tag, and I think that I therefore tag you because it's really fun and it makes you think twice about some of your favorite books. So I hope that you had fun watching this video and that you will try out this tag or watch some of these other Think Twice tags. And until then, not until then, like now and during that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.